From the outside, his life looked ordinary. Too ordinary for anyone to imagine there was something extraordinary hidden inside him. He lived in a small, crowded neighborhood where loud streets never slept and dreams often died quietly. People there worried more about tomorrow's food than tomorrow's future. Most boys his age worked early, gave up early, and learned fast that hoping too much only led to disappointment. But he was different. Not because he was stronger, richer, or smarter than others. He was different because of one simple thing: he never stopped listening to the music inside his heart. The first time he touched a piano, he was still very young. He had gone with his mother to clean a large old building where she worked sometimes for extra money. While she cleaned upstairs, he wandered around the empty hall below. That was when he saw it, an old piano resting in the corner, dusty and forgotten, right under a broken window where sunlight slipped through like a quiet spotlight. Many keys were yellow, a few were cracked, and it looked like no one had played it in years. But to him it felt alive. He sat down slowly, almost afraid to touch it. When he pressed one key, the sound was soft and shaky. It wasn't perfect, but it felt magical. He pressed another one, then another. The sounds mixed together in a strange, beautiful way. Something moved inside his chest that he could not explain. From that moment on, the piano was no longer just an object. It became his secret world. After that day, whenever he got a little free time, he would sneak back into that hall. Sometimes the door was locked. Sometimes the piano was covered. Sometimes he had only a few minutes before someone noticed him. But every single moment he got with it felt like gold. He didn't know the names of the notes. He didn't know how to read music. Everything he played came from feeling. He listened, repeated, failed, and tried again. His fingers hurt often. His wrists felt stiff. Still, he returned every time. At home, there was no piano, no quiet place to practice, and no one who understood what he was trying to do. When he spoke about music, people smiled politely and changed the topic. Some laughed lightly and told him he should focus on real life. Others were more direct. They told him that people like him didn't become musicians. They told him that talent is born in rich homes, not crowded streets. Over time, those words became noise in the background, painful but familiar. School was not easy either. He was not bad at studies, but his mind was often somewhere else. When teachers explained lessons, he listened, but his thoughts drifted toward melodies, rhythms, and sounds that only he could hear. During breaks, while others played games, he tapped on desks, walls, even his own thighs, creating invisible music. Some classmates mocked him for it. A few copied him for fun. No one took it seriously. At night, when the electricity went out, which happened often, he lay on his thin mattress and imagined a piano in front of him. In his mind, every key had a sound. Every sound had a feeling. He practiced in silence, moving his fingers in the air, building songs nobody else could hear yet. Sometimes he wondered if he was foolish. Sometimes doubt crept in quietly and whispered that maybe everyone else was right. But every time that happened, another stronger voice rose inside him and said, "Just one chance. That's all I need." Years passed this way. The small boy grew into a quiet young man. Life became heavier. Responsibilities increased. His mother's health began to weaken, and money became even tighter. He took small jobs wherever he could, loading things, cleaning spaces, running errands. Some days he came home so tired that his legs shook when he climbed the stairs. Yet, if he had even 5 minutes of energy left, he used it to return to that same old piano. The piano hall changed too. The building became quieter as people stopped coming. Dust grew thicker. Rain leaked in through the broken roof during storms. But the piano stayed, and so did he. It was as if they were both holding on to each other in a forgotten corner of the world. There were nights when he played softly while rain tapped on the roof and wind brushed through the broken windows. Those were his favorite moments. In those moments, he didn't feel poor. He didn't feel small. He felt powerful. The music made him feel seen, even in total silence, yet deep inside, a painful truth also lived. No matter how much he practiced alone, no one knew what he could do. Talent hidden forever might as well not exist at all. He needed people to hear him, but how could that happen when doors stayed closed before he even touched the handle? One afternoon, as he carried heavy boxes for a small payment, he overheard people talking nearby. They spoke with excitement about a large public music event that was coming soon. A real event. Real performers? A real stage. The kind of stage he had only seen on screens and posters. The words hit him like lightning. His heart began to race. That night he could barely sleep. For the first time in his life, the one chance he had always dreamed of suddenly felt close enough to touch Dot in the following days. He gathered every piece of courage he had. He practiced harder than ever. His fingers bled lightly once, but he wrapped them and kept playing. His hands shook from fear sometimes, but the music never stopped. He wasn't preparing to compete with others. He was preparing to finally prove to anyone, to everyone, maybe even to himself, that his dream was real. When the day came to go near the event location, he stood at a distance at first, watching people enter with confidence. Some had instruments in shiny cases. Some walked in groups, laughing loudly. They all looked like they belonged there. He looked down at his worn shoes and simple clothes and suddenly felt very small. Doubt tried to rise again. For a few moments he almost turned back, but then he remembered every lonely night, every silent practice, every time he was told that his dream was foolish. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. This was the beginning of the moment that would decide everything. The next day, he returned to the event with a heart full of hope and hands trembling with both fear and excitement. The building was massive, with banners hanging from the ceiling, announcing that some of the best musicians from the city would perform. He watched from a distance as people walked inside confidently, carrying shiny instruments, dressed neatly in clothes that cost more than his entire week's earnings. The closer he got, the heavier his chest felt. A part of him whispered that maybe he didn't belong here, that maybe this was a world only for people who were already good enough. But another voice, stronger and louder, said, "Just one chance. That's all you need. Just one." With that thought, he walked toward the entrance and nervously approached the organizers. He cleared his throat and asked politely, "Excuse me, may I have a chance to perform? Just one chance, please." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The organizers looked at him like he had said something impossible. Their eyes scanned his worn-out clothes, the thin bag over his shoulder, and the nervous look on his face. "No," one of them said firmly. "We already have enough performers. You can't just come in like this." He swallowed hard but refused to leave. "Please," he said, his voice shaking, "just a few minutes. I promise you won't regret it." Another organizer shook her head. "Look, kid, we don't have time for experiments. People are here to see real performers, not this." She gestured vaguely at him as if he was invisible, like he didn't matter at all. Some people around chuckled quietly, whispering to each other. He could hear snickers, soft laughter, and even one voice saying, "Why doesn't he just go home?" He wanted to sink into the ground and disappear, but he couldn't. He had practiced too long for this. He had dreamed too hard for this. He took a deep breath. His hands were clammy and his stomach twisted with nerves, but he tried again. "I just need one chance. Please, just a few notes." "I'll do my best." The organizers exchanged glances. One of them sighed and said, "Kid, we can't let you perform. You're not on the list. We have rules. We don't have time for people like you." He felt a wave of shame and disappointment. The same feeling he had faced so many times in his life, the feeling of being ignored, overlooked, invisible. For a moment he thought about leaving, about giving up before even starting. But he shook his head. Not this time. Not today. He couldn't. He wandered to a corner of the hall, watching the other performers rehearse. The sounds of pianos, violins, and flutes filled the air, each note polished and perfect. The musicians moved confidently, their fingers dancing over their instruments as if born to play. He felt a mixture of awe and fear. He wasn't like them, not yet, maybe never. But he had something they didn't: years of secret practice, nights spent dreaming of this very moment. And a fire inside him that refused to die. He thought about every lonely evening at the old piano, Every night of aching fingers, every time someone had laughed at him, telling him that his dream was impossible. Those memories gave him courage. He stood a little taller. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. "I don't care what they say," he whispered to himself. "I'm going to play, even if it's just for me." Hours passed as he lingered in the hall, trying to find an opportunity. Performers were called one by one, and he watched from the sidelines. Every time someone played, the audience clapped politely. He imagined himself on that stage, imagining his own music filling the hall. His heart raced at the thought. Finally, a small break appeared. One of the performers finished early, and there was a moment when the piano was left unoccupied. He approached slowly, as quietly as he could. No one noticed him. His legs felt heavy, his hands shook, but he knew that if he didn't act now, he might never get another chance. He sat down on the bench, placing his fingers on the keys. At first, the sound was hesitant, unsure, shaky. People nearby started to notice. One organizer frowned and walked toward him. "Hey, what are you doing?" I just want to play," he said softly. "Just a little." The organizer frowned again, clearly annoyed. "You can't." But before anyone could stop him, he pressed a few more keys and something unexpected happened. The music began to flow. It was soft, almost unnoticeable at first, but then it grew stronger, fuller, richer. Each note seemed to come from deep inside him, carrying years of dreams, failures, and hope. The people around him froze. Some stopped moving, some stopped talking. Even the organizers paused. The notes didn't sound like the polished music of the professional performers. But they had something they didn't. They had emotion. They had heart. They had honesty. Every strike of the key told a story, his story, a story of struggle, persistence, and the courage to ask for a chance when everyone said no. The audience began to gather, curious about the strange, unplanned music filling the hall. People whispered to each other. Some looked confused, some skeptical, but as the music continued, the whispers faded. Eyes widened. Faces softened. No one moved. They were listening, really listening, to a young man who had risked everything just to play. For him, it didn't matter that he wasn't on the official list. It didn't matter that his clothes were worn and his shoes dusty. He was no longer the boy ignored in the streets. He was a musician. He was a storyteller. He was someone who refused to give up. No matter how many doors were closed in his face, even as the organizers debated whether to stop him, the music kept flowing. People leaned closer, drawn in by the raw honesty of his performance. Some faces began to shine with tears. Others were frozen in disbelief. This was not supposed to happen. They had seen many talented performers, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the notes. It was the feeling behind them. The life that poured out of his hands like sunlight breaking through clouds. He played not for approval, not for applause. He played because he had to. Because for years, no one had believed in him. And now, for the first time, he had the chance to show the world who he really was. And even though the world had said no, he refused to accept it. He refused to stay invisible. That day, he didn't just touch the keys of a piano. He touched the hearts of everyone who had doubted him. And while he didn't know it yet, this small act of courage, the act of asking for just one chance, even when everyone said no, would change everything about his life. As he sat at the piano, the room seemed larger than ever, filled with sounds, footsteps, and whispered conversations. The organizers were frowning, murmuring to each other, unsure whether to stop him. Some performers glanced over, annoyed that someone who wasn't supposed to play was taking attention away. The audience was curious but skeptical. They had expected trained musicians, not a young man in worn clothes. Nervously touching the keys, he could feel the weight of every eye in the room. His palms were sweaty, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. For a moment, doubt tried to creep in, whispering, maybe they're right. Maybe you don't belong here. But he shook his head. All those years of practice, all those lonely nights, all the times people had laughed at him, they had led to this moment. He had to try. He couldn't leave without showing at least a part of what he had inside. He closed his eyes and let his fingers find the keys. The first notes were quiet, unsure, almost like the sound of a shy voice trying to be heard. People shifted in their seats. Some frowned. One of the organizers muttered, "We really should stop him." But the music continued. Slowly, the notes grew stronger, more confident, more alive. Each one carried something real, something that couldn't be taught. Something that came only from years of dreaming and believing when no one else did. The melody was soft at first, gentle like a whisper, drawing people closer without them realizing it. Those who had been laughing or skeptical moments ago were now still, leaning forward, listening. Every note seemed to tell a story. The night spent alone in a dusty hall, the rejection, the hunger, the longing to be seen, and the quiet hope that never went away. His fingers moved with growing confidence. Guided by instinct and heart rather than training, something unusual began to happen. The room, which had been filled with murmurs and movement, fell into a strange silence. People stopped whispering. Even the organizers, who had been debating whether to remove him, froze mid-conversation. The music was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, filling every corner of the hall, touching everyone who heard it. Some faces softened, some eyes glistened with tears. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. All that existed was the piano and the young man who dared to play it. He was unaware of the effect he was having. He was not thinking about the audience, the applause, or the approval. All he knew was that he had to continue. Each note came from memory, from feeling, from the countless nights when only the piano and he existed in the world. Every chord was a piece of his soul, every pause a story of struggle and hope. His music was not perfect, but it was honest. That honesty was stronger than any polish or training. People in the audience began to exchange looks of surprise. Some whispered softly to each other, "Who is this boy? And how is he playing like that?" Some tried to find flaws, but they couldn't. There was nothing to criticize. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful. Some who had been dismissive from the start began to feel something unfamiliar respect. Others were simply stunned, unsure how to react to such unexpected talent. Emerging from someone they had ignored at first glance, he felt the energy of the room shift. It was no longer a place where rules and schedules mattered. It was a space where music could speak louder than words. He began to play faster now, fingers flying over the keys with surprising skill, producing melodies that were full of life, full of emotion. He could feel the audience leaning in, drawn by the story he was telling without saying a word. The music built up like a river swelling after rain, unstoppable, powerful yet graceful for a moment. He glanced at the organizers. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, mouths slightly open in disbelief. Some of them whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Others simply stood frozen, realizing that the boy they had refused to even consider had completely captivated everyone in the hall. The performers who had been rehearsing nearby were also watching in silence. Some looked at their own instruments, unsure if they could ever create something that touched hearts the way this music did. Others shook their heads in admiration. None of them had ever seen someone transform a simple piano into a storyteller in such a raw, unpolished, yet breathtaking way. As the music continued, a strange connection formed between the young man and the audience. Every person in the room could feel the story behind each note. They felt his fears, his dreams, and his determination. They felt the years of rejection, the nights of secret practice, the silent cries for recognition. And for the first time, they understood the power of one person refusing to give up. Even when the world had said no, he didn't notice the time passing. He didn't hear the footsteps of people approaching to watch more closely. He only knew the piano, the music, and the feeling that he was finally, truly alive in that moment. He pushed himself further, letting the emotions flow freely. The sounds that came out were not just melodies, they were stories, lessons, and feelings all wrapped into music. Every crescendo was a triumph, every soft passage a sigh of longing. Some audience members were moved to tears. Others sat frozen, their mouths slightly open, unsure how to respond to something so unexpected. The energy in the room shifted completely. What had started as doubt and skepticism had turned into awe, amazement, and a quiet, profound respect. He could feel it. Even though he had not played for applause or recognition, it was clear now his music had reached everyone in the room. Finally, after what felt like both minutes and hours, he slowed down, ending on a soft, lingering note. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with awe, disbelief, and unspoken emotions. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, slowly, the applause began. At first, it was soft, hesitant, unsure. Then it grew louder, stronger, unstoppable. People stood clapping and cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some laughed in disbelief, shaking their heads as if trying to convince themselves it had really happened. The organizers, who had doubted him from the start, looked at each other, speechless. They had been wrong. The boy they had refused to give a chance had done the impossible. For the first time, he smiled genuinely. He had asked for one chance, and now the world had finally seen him. Not as a poor boy in worn clothes, not as someone they could ignore, but as a musician, a storyteller, someone who refused to give up. Even when everyone said no, in that moment, he understood something important. Talent alone was not enough. Opportunity was not enough. What mattered most was courage, the courage to stand up, to ask for a chance, and to keep going even when rejection seemed certain. That courage had carried him to this moment, and now, for the first time, he could see that it was enough. As the applause faded, he took a deep breath and looked around. The room had changed. The same people who had ignored him, doubted him, and even laughed at him were now staring, some with wide eyes, some with tears glistening, some completely silent, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. For a moment he felt a strange mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief himself. The music he had kept hidden for so long had finally spoken for him. He returned to the piano, not out of fear, but out of a deep desire to show them more of what he carried inside. This time he didn't hesitate. He let the music flow naturally, letting his hands dance over the keys without second-guessing. Every chord, every note, every pause was deliberate yet full of raw feeling. His story was no longer just his own. It was becoming the story of everyone in that room. The hall seemed to disappear around him. There was no audience, no organizers, no banners, no rules, just him and the piano. And yet the energy of the listeners was tangible. He could feel their breaths, their racing hearts, their emotions shifting with each note. The room hung on him, completely captivated as the music grew. He began to play faster, yet every note was precise, every melody heartfelt. It was no longer shy or hesitant. It was confident, alive, vibrant. The music rose and fell like waves. On a stormy sea, carrying every ounce of emotion he had bottled up over years of rejection, struggle, and persistence. He played not for recognition, not for praise, but because he had to. Because for years nobody had believed in him, and now, at last, he had the chance to tell his story without words. People in the audience were no longer whispering. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, trying to absorb every sound. Some covered their mouths in awe. Others had tears streaming down their cheeks, feeling emotions they could not even name. They had expected skill, polish, and rehearsed talent, but they were witnessing something far more powerful: truth, passion, and courage poured into music. The organizers who had refused him earlier could not look away. Their mouths were open, hands frozen mid-gesture. One of them whispered to another, "I've never seen anything like this," while the other simply shook their head in disbelief. They had underestimated him, as everyone else had, and now they had no choice but to witness the undeniable talent in front of them. As he continued, the music grew even more powerful, each note filled with meaning. Every chord spoke of his lonely nights in the old, dusty hall, the times he had been laughed at, the times he had been told he was foolish. Every rhythm carried hope and determination, resilience and courage. Those who listened felt it all, as if they could walk in his shoes for just a moment. The room was electrified. No one dared interrupt. Even those who had been planning to move on to go about their day could not tear themselves away. The music had created a spell that held everyone in place. He wasn't just performing. He was connecting, sharing a piece of his soul with every single person in the hall. The melodies became richer, deeper, more complex, yet they remained genuine. They weren't perfect in the polished sense, but they were perfect in their honesty. The audience began to understand that talent alone wasn't what made this moment special. It was courage, heart, and the refusal to give up despite every obstacle. This was what made music unforgettable, what made it live inside people long after the last note faded. Some performers in the hall, who had been rehearsing and preparing for weeks, stopped mid-play to watch. Some whispered to each other, "How? Is he doing that?" Others simply nodded slowly, as if acknowledging something they couldn't explain. The young man's performance wasn't just beautiful. It was transformative. He had taken a simple piano and turned it into a storyteller, a voice for every person who had ever been ignored, doubted, or underestimated. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes felt like hours. Every note was more emotional than the last, every chord a revelation. He played not for recognition, not for applause, not for fame. He played because he had to, because music had been his companion through lonely nights, because it was the one place in the world where he was fully himself. And in sharing it, he had given everyone else a gift and unforgettable experience, a glimpse into a life of perseverance and courage. Finally, as the music slowly drew to an end, he allowed the final note to linger in the air. It hung like a gentle sigh, soft but powerful, carrying every emotion he had poured into it. The room remained silent for a moment, suspended in disbelief, awe, and deep respect. And then, slowly, the first clap came. At first it was soft, hesitant, almost unsure. But then it grew louder, spreading through the hall like wildfire. Hands clapped, feet stamped, voices cheered. Some people stood, others wiped away tears, some simply stared, unable to believe what they had witnessed. The applause was not just for skill. It was for courage, for resilience, for refusing to accept rejection. It was for showing the world that one chance could change everything. People who had doubted him, laughed at him, or ignored him now looked at him with admiration, respect, and a little bit of awe. He sat back for a moment, breathing heavily, exhausted yet exhilarated. The music had left him drained but alive. He looked at the audience, and for the first time in his life, he saw them truly see him, not as a boy from a struggling neighborhood, not as someone to ignore, but as a musician, a storyteller, someone who had refused to give up despite every obstacle. In that moment, he understood something profound. Life would always have obstacles, always have people who say no, always have moments of doubt and fear. But courage, persistence, and belief in oneself could overcome even the harshest rejection. His music had proven it, not just to the audience but to himself. That day, he had not just performed the song. He had shared a piece of his life, his dreams, his struggles, and his hope. And for the people in that hall, it would be a performance they never forgot. For the first time, he realized that one chance, taken with courage and heart, could change everything. After the last note lingered in the hall and the applause finally began to fade, the young man sat for a moment, catching his breath. His hands were sore, his fingers trembling slightly, but he felt alive in a way he never had before. He looked around the room and saw faces he had never imagined seeing before, faces filled with admiration, surprise, and respect. People who had doubted him, ignored him, or even laughed at him were now standing in awe. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Some were whispering to each other, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. He had done what he had set out to do. He had shown the world what he was capable of. The organizers, who had refused to let him perform just a short while ago, were now coming forward, speaking in hushed tones, exchanging glances that clearly said, "We were wrong." One of them, the senior organizer, finally approached him and said, "That was incredible. You have talent that we cannot ignore. We need to talk about opportunities for you, real opportunities." The young man nodded, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and disbelief. For years, no one had believed in him, but now the same people were offering him chances he had never dared to dream about. Even as the applause continued around him, He thought about how far he had come. He remembered the small, dusty hall where he had practiced for years, the lonely nights, the broken piano, and the silent hopes that nobody had ever seen. All those nights, all that effort, all the times he had been turned away, it had led to this moment. And now he realized something important. The pain and rejection he had faced were not meaningless. They had built him, strengthened him, and made him ready for this opportunity when it finally came. After the initial excitement settled, people began to approach him individually. Some performers who had watched in disbelief shook his hand and congratulated him, genuinely impressed by the emotion and skill he had shown. One musician said softly, "I've trained for years, but what you just did." It touched people in a way I've never experienced before. Others were curious about his journey, asking how he had learned to play without formal lessons, how he had practiced so tirelessly, and how he had never given up despite so many obstacles. Each question reminded him of all the times he had been invisible, and now, for the first time, he felt truly seen. As the day continued, the young man was offered more than just words of praise. Organizers offered him chances to perform on larger stages, to work with professional instructors, and even to travel to events he had only dreamed about. Opportunities that had seemed impossible just hours ago were now within reach. He accepted them humbly, remembering that this was only the beginning. Talent alone was not enough. Perseverance, courage, and the willingness to keep asking for one chance had brought him here. When he returned home that evening, the neighborhood seemed different. The streets, the crowded houses, and the noisy corners were the same, but he felt taller, stronger, and more certain. For the first time, he knew that his dreams were not just fantasies, they were real, achievable, and waiting for him to claim them. People he passed on the streets noticed a change too. Some smiled, some nodded, sensing that something extraordinary had happened. Even if they didn't know the details, over the next few weeks, life changed in small but meaningful ways. He continued to practice every day, but now with purpose and guidance. Teachers and mentors who recognized his potential helped him improve technique and explore new ways to express himself through music. He learned to balance emotion with skill, building on the natural talent he had honed for years in silence. Every day, the piano became not just a tool for practice, but a bridge to a life he had only imagined before. His story also began to inspire others. Young people in his neighborhood, who had grown up hearing that dreams were for the lucky or the wealthy, now looked at him differently. They saw that dedication and courage could change everything, that even a boy from a small, crowded street could touch hearts and earn respect. Some came to watch him practice, eager to learn and understand how he had persevered. Others simply felt hope that they too could chase a dream that seemed impossible. Despite the recognition and new opportunities, he never forgot the lessons from the past. He remained humble, remembering the times he had been ignored, laughed at, or rejected. Those experiences had shaped him into someone who valued every chance, no matter how small. They had taught him patience, resilience, and the quiet strength needed to keep going when no one believed in him. He knew that the applause and praise would not last forever, but the courage and skill he had built would. Months later, he returned to the hall where it had all started. The old piano, dusty and worn, still waited in the corner, a faithful companion from his earliest days. He sat down, smiling, and played a soft melody, remembering every night of practice, every rejection, and every quiet moment of hope. This piano had been the place where he learned that one chance could change everything. And now it was the same piano where he could reflect on how far he had come. Looking back, he understood the truth that had guided him all along. Life would always have challenges, always have people who said no, and always have obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome. But courage, persistence, and belief in oneself could open doors that no one else thought possible. He had begged for one chance, been refused, ignored, and doubted, yet that one chance had changed everything. And in that change, he had not only discovered himself, but also inspired countless others who heard his story. By the end of the year, he had performed in many venues, small and large, but every performance carried the same authenticity and heart. He never played for fame or money. He played to share his story, his journey, and the emotions that only music could express. Each time he sat at a piano, he remembered the young boy who had touched those first hesitant keys in a dusty hall, and he felt grateful that he had never given up. His life was no longer defined by rejection or doubt. It was defined by courage, perseverance, and the power of one chance. He became a living example that sometimes all it takes is a single opportunity, seized with determination, to change a life forever. And through it all, he remained the same humble, determined person who had once sat in silence, dreaming of a day when the world might finally listen. In the end, his story was not just about music. It was about hope, resilience, and the quiet power of refusing to give up. It reminded everyone who heard it that dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem, are worth chasing. That courage, even in the face of rejection, can open doors that were once closed. And that one chance, just one, can be enough to change everything.